Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Matthew Hadawani, and I've had a lot of special guests on this channel, but this one means a lot to me personally. I'm joined by Dan Berlin. Dan, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great, Matt. Thanks for having me on the program.
Absolutely. And the reason why this one is so special because it was actually your class in second year where I discovered my passion for sports writing. And this is kind of all your fault. So um, we'll go from there. But kind of when did you realize that you wanted to get into teaching?
Well, it's really interesting. When I tell people who know me the story, I've always known. In fact, I'd probably say I was about 17 or 18 years old, and it was really quite interesting. I tell this story to my closest friends and even to my parents. But I went to my parents when I was about 18, and I told them, I said, I want to be a teacher when I'm older. And it didn't quite get the response I was hoping for. My father was a doctor growing up, and my mother was a professional working in the medical industry as well. She was a trained nurse, but went on to have like director of nursing roles and duties. And I think they really wanted for me to maybe be a doctor or a lawyer, in the classic sense that that generation would think. So when I told them I wanted to be a teacher, they were like, "No, no, you're not going to be a teacher." And sure enough, it just goes to show that what we have within our soul and what we're destined to do has a way of manifesting itself. But that's how long I've known. The beauty is whether it's volunteering as a baseball coach and teaching, young kids how to play baseball or tennis or other sports or being a camp counselor. I've just always enjoyed having the opportunity to inspire and motivate and help others be the best they can be. And now I've had the opportunity wonderfully to be able to do that at Ryerson for a number of years.
Speaking to that point, you touched on being a coach there. How similar or how different is it being a coach versus being a teacher?
That's a great question. I would even sort of break that up into three different areas because there's the sports coach, but Matthew, I've also taken the opportunity to get a master's degree in coaching and also working towards professional coaching certification in terms of executive or life coaching as well.
Hmm.
And they all sort of have interesting nuances, but I try to use some of my coaching knowledge and some of those strategies within the classroom because here's what I believe. Part of what I think has made me an effective teacher and allowed me to connect with students like yourself is just this idea of empowerment and the idea that what my experience is and my perception of the world or opportunities or how things should be done is different than every other person out there. Every person has their own unique experiences that shape their thinking, that shape their lives, and that shape their motivations. So, coaching from a professional or life coaching standpoint is designed to ask questions that allow for an individual, that allow the person the opportunity to self reflect, become aware of potentially those the things that are their strengths and their motivators, but also help create self-awareness around hurdles that we often put up in front of ourselves that might inhibit our ability to move forward. And by asking thoughtful, pertinent, relevant questions, it's designed to try to draw out from the individual the answers within themselves. And by drawing out those answers, and this maybe now ties in the teaching component, because listen, teaching is about engagement, it's about connection, right? It's about we have this material. How can I connect this material with you so that you can get excited about this material that I'm sharing? And Matthew, to your point, you felt that connection in my sport journalism class. I apologize, but nonetheless, you felt it. So that's the material. What's sometimes if I'm a teacher, I'm telling you what the material is. As a life coach, you might be telling me what the material is. And
Right.
then we talk about how to best engage with that material. And it's a fascinating I mean, I love it in the sense that it when you truly feel connected to material or you feel connected to a person or you feel connected to potentially the outcome, what you can work towards.
Mhm.
That's a feeling. And that if it feels right and it feels good, I would say that's often how things get done in a really
Absolutely. Speaking about that sports journalism class, I mean, as students, we're so often wired to, write formally, write this way, use, very formal language. But when you have students in your class who are very uncomfortable writing in a very informal and story-based type of writing rather than, essay structured writing, how do you kind of overcome that hurdle there?
one of the things, it's a great question, Matthew. And I would say, there are always going to be hurdles. But if we just look at this initial hurdle, you know, there are obviously skills and ways, writing as a skill that you can be taught, and through practice and repetitions, you can develop that skill, like anything else. If we use baseball as the analogy, we might understand that what it is to hit a home run, but to actually perform the action of hitting a ball 300 plus feet requires practice and technique and
Mhm.
fundamental training and just a lot of repetitions, right? A lot of practice. So in that sense, there's no substitute. That requires a certain amount of discipline, but it's like, hey, if you're taught the right way, the proper technique, and you work using that technique and you're willing to put in the work and practice, you're
Mhm.
going to see results. So that's number one. But the other thing that is sort of what I like to consider a sweet spot for me and what I try to convey to students is this idea of finding your voice. Finding your voice, whether it be the spoken word, verbal communication, but also finding your voice through the written word, and how when you write, it has kind of a sound to it. It sounds like you, and
Yeah.
it's a way to. And what I find, Matthew, for a lot of young students, that they haven't necessarily found their voice yet. And I'll say that that's totally fine. Just looking back at a great story in my career, Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, is obviously commonly referenced and certainly speaks to the Beatles and how they were performing at the Cavern nightclub and just got all those reps in night after night after night. For me, the opportunity to become a master communicator, a
Mhm.
presenter, was at the CN Tower. I got a summer job as the elevator operator at the CN Tower, and I had to deliver a 58-second speech going up and a 58-second speech going down. I did it hundreds of times a day, every day, for an entire summer. And I remember the first time I got in the elevator, I was too scared to even utter a peep. I had my trainer there and giving me like elbow shots. Dan, like we only got 46 seconds left. Get going. And I couldn't speak. And then eventually, to speak to your point about that hurdle, I just I did it. At some point, the difference between doing it and not doing it is just doing it. And I did it. And then as I got more comfortable just doing the scripted speech, once I had a grasp of that and I could do that, then I could start to play with it a little bit. And I could let my personality, my inflection, my sense of humor start to come out. And that's when I found my voice. And I can apply that voice, whether I'm writing, speaking to you here today, on an elevator delivering a speech, or whatever. And yeah, it feels pretty good. It's like, hey, I know who I am, and and I and I want to convey that voice to others.
Are you the type of person who feels the need to have to speak in an elevator now that you've done that for years?
No, I'm like dead quiet in an elevator. I
if you
have to
if you
stay
go to
over.
the CN Tower and you take the elevator up, are you playing it over in your mind?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
We're faced with the very real reality of, obviously searching for, employment or being a student during a global pandemic. But as a teacher, how has this kind of shaped the way that you approach lesson planning and communicating with your students?
Great question. I obviously that shift to Zoom classes exclusively, created certain efficiencies that maybe we hadn't looked at as something that maybe was advantageous. For
Hmm.
instance, the past 3 years, Matthew, I've taught 8 a.m. lectures
Yeah.
and had a much higher percentage of students who attended at 8 a.m. on Zoom than I
Yeah, it's
did.
a lot easier.
It is, and creates new efficiencies. But I would say the major part potentially missing, like again, it's taking this material and finding a way to engage people with it for the purpose of connecting.
Hmm.
So when we're not in a room where there's a physical connection, how do we connect?
Right.
And I would say I probably spent the majority of my time this semester focusing on building community, as you might have remembered experiencing when we were in class together, like
Absolutely.
tight knit, like we're all, and I say it almost on the very first day, hey, we're a team. We're all together. We're looking for ways to support each other, work together, and understand not only our own purpose, but the greater purpose and why we're all here. And it gives, I always felt like that gave a heightened sense of meaning to why we're here and using that as the springboard for the materials. I will say this, Matthew. I actually felt that translated very well onto Zoom. It's about, hey, let's put our cameras on. Let's be present. Let's be here for however long we have to be here 1 hour, 2 hours. My goal, of course, is to keep things moving.
Hmm.
So, as a broadcast producer, we know if we're just doing one thing, the same thing for over an hour, we see the attention rate drop. So
Right.
I'm looking for ways to stimulate breakout rooms. Here's a video, do some work on your own independently, just as a way to keep things moving. But I think the other secret sauce, if you will, through this entire opportunity to be online this year was giving everyone a chance to feel like they belong. Again, like they had a voice within that room and that we were all going to be there for each other together in a really strange and different time. And I feel like the students really responded to that. I felt like they needed it, and then they were really responsive to it. And I found it just really built that community that everyone, including myself, needed.
I can attest to that because I mean, your class had a very different feeling from a lot of other ones that I attended over my 4 years there. Your class felt more like a club. Like it's a place that I wanted to be at. It's a place that other people wanted to be at, and you can kind of feel, an energetic buzz in the room whenever you would walk in that just wasn't present in some other classes. But outside of the classroom, you're also a very accomplished member of the sports media industry. When did you kind of realize that that was an avenue that you wanted to pursue as well?
Well, I guess when my folks said I couldn't be a teacher, I had to figure out. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was in my senior high school yearbook. When they list like what everyone's most likely to be when they grow up or when they're older, I was like the one who was most likely going to be the voice of the Toronto Blue Jays. Like I mean, I love and still love sports. I love all sports. I love the competition, the drama, the art, the beauty. It's interesting. I've never bet on sports ever, despite the fact that I've actually been on betting shows and talked about it. I love I love sport. I love everything about it. I love it from the training and conditioning aspect to the statistical aspect and probability aspect of sport to just the sheer drama and the storytelling of the games. I've never grown bored of it. I mean, I have this insatiable appetite, and the beauty of it is that every game and every athlete is different, and I've always been drawn to that. So I think that was the precursor. My passion and knowledge for sports, was always different than everyone else's. Like I just every waking hour, I was either playing sports or consuming sports, and then later on, creating content around sports. So it really came down to it was interesting. I was working at the CN Tower in my early 20s. I went from elevator operator to giving a speech on my elevator where the director of guest services was on my elevator and I didn't even know who that person was. I had the entire elevator in stitches by the time we hit the 1 minute mark on the 1100th floor of the CN Tower, to the point where he handpicked me to become a, a PR, a PR assistant within there. And I started to work my way up at the CN Tower. Um, but I was like, it wasn't me. Like,
Right.
I was sports. It was the communication part, which was great. And that's where I learned how to serve others in a professional capacity, because that's
Mhm.
part of what teaching is. It's not about me being on this soapbox telling you how it is. It's actually having this privilege and opportunity to serve students and help them in meaningful ways find out who they are
Mhm.
and find their voice. So I did the CN Tower for a bit. I went to Australia to pursue baseball, got to play semi pro ball in Australia when I was 25 and had a magical year there. But I'm very family oriented. My family was here in Canada, in Toronto. And after a year, I said, I'm going to go for a year. And I came back.
Yeah.
When I came back, Sportsnet had just launched. And back then, this predated the Ryerson Sport Media program. I mean, in many ways, you maybe went to a community college to get some technical training for media.
Absolutely.
And listen, the RTA program in school certainly existed back then. But I Sportsnet had just launched. A close friend of mine was working there, and he said, "Dan, I think I could probably get you in there." He put me in touch with the production manager, and I remember, God bless my mom, who didn't want me to be a teacher but always gave me good advice. She said, why don't you go into your interview watching the Leafs game that particular night and doing a highlight package and present the script to this production manager when you go in for the interview the next day? So two things happened in this interview, Matthew. Number one, we were talking, and sure enough, how do you feel about watching sports, doing highlight packages? And I was like, what? Like, right after the whole thing. I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, I watched the game last night and I put this script together. I'll never forget what this person said. They were like, hey, do you mind if I keep this script to show our broadcast associates how to write scripts? I was like, yeah, you go ahead and keep that. I gotta put
This one's on the house.
Yeah. And then he had me fill out a quiz that was out of 50 questions, just a sport proficiency quiz. And, I got 50 out of 50 on it, but I finished the quiz in under 2 minutes. Like, it was just, it was like just secondary knowledge to me.
Right.
So that's how I got my foot in the door. And I was at Sportsnet for 11 years and got in early and worked my way up to a producer, got a chance to do some on-air work too. So it was that that was really kind of the start of it all.
So you started there as an assignment editor, and as you said, you worked your way up to a producer. What do you kind of attribute your success to being able to climb that corporate ladder that's sometimes very intimidating?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, listen, back in those days, Sportsnet, how there was mobility, there always is. Like, if you're good and you're driven and you're focused, there's always going to be opportunities to rise and to do what you want. So step number one is decide what it is you want to do. And always be looking to let people know that that's what you want. So I wanted to be a producer, assignment editing. I did it for about, I'm guessing, probably 4 or 5 years of my 11 years at Sportsnet. Grueling job. Learn more being an assignment editor than probably in any other role that I did. But I mean, just like two phones like attached to your neck and constant coordination. That's what I refer to that role. I was constantly coordinating things, constantly, to a point where these were 12-hour days. I'd hit the ground running at 10 a.m. and at 10 p.m. By the time I left, it was just, I maybe had 5 minutes to myself to,
Right.
catch my breath. All that being said, the advice that was given to me is like, listen, if you want to be a producer, just act as if. You don't need a title for someone to tell you that's who you are. And in many ways, as a professional coach now, I actually extol those exact same virtues, which is to say that my brand now is educator and coach. Whether if I didn't have the opportunity to do it at Ryerson or in other walks of life, I would still be an educator and a coach. And that's kind of how I looked at myself and my brand. And that's sort of how I communicate to people. It's like my job title isn't the definition of who I am.
Mhm.
It's the work that I want to do. Now, to your point, oftentimes it's just getting an opportunity to do it. So, from a producer standpoint, they always had these new segments that they wanted to try that always everybody else looked at and was like, I don't want to do it. Like, yeah, one was called the inbox. This was early days of the internet, and it involved using a smart board, which was this new technology at the time where you could sort of bring video to life and do some annotations on it. I mean, it's so crude now, but back then it was like cutting edge. How you can use this tool to bring the internet to life. And I said, I'll do it. I was like, you need help? I'm going to do it. You need a help on a shoot? Let me come along and I'll help. And I just started acting like a producer and took the opportunity. And that ended up resulting in the job title.
In 2014, you went over to a rival that was brewing in Ontario, in TSN, where you were a co-host for Inside the Lines, a weekly sports betting show, which, per your LinkedIn, was for entertainment purposes only. But with a show like that, that was kind of weekly and broken up between so many days in between shows, did you find it easier or more difficult to come up with topics to talk about?
Yeah. I would say easy and only in the sense that that was a very football centric show. And we ran that show basically from 1 or 2 weeks in late August, just before the football season started, the NFL season. And we talked about CFL as well. And then went till about May. Um, and then we would sort of talk a little bit about hockey. I would say sometimes, honestly, Matthew, I think it can be tougher coming up with fresh new material daily
Hmm.
than weekly. So I'd say we did okay there. As far as going over to a rival is concerned, I after leaving Sportsnet, I sort of embarked on what you would call a portfolio career,
Hmm.
where I was just looking for great opportunities to work with good people doing the type of work that I love to do. And I was less focused on it having to fit into full-time work, as we define full-time. And I was just looking for jobs and opportunities and contracts where I could do work that I loved. And I ended up filling up, just up right up until as recently as really a month ago when I was brought on as full-time faculty at Ryerson now as an assistant professor. I had spent the last 10 years of my career working in this gig economy, a
Hmm.
portfolio. And I'll say this, I was probably busier than I had ever been at any point full time because I was managing 3 or 4 jobs at once and always keeping an eye on what could and need and was next. So
Hmm.
I was also really nimble in that space as well. A little bit of uncertainty. I didn't have a full time job. So I always had to re up contracts and look for the next thing. As far as TSN Inside the Lines goes, I think we did that for 2 seasons, and then title sponsor of our show, Bet365, pulled out of Canada, and it was a great run. But I always look at it too, Matthew. And the thing is, we never can truly predict what the future holds. I mean, I've been lucky.
Hmm.
10 years at Sportsnet, 10 years now at Ryerson, and looking forward to the next 10, 20 years there now, and being able to build off that. But what I always just focus on is today, and just enjoying each class, each student experience, each interaction as truly unique, and recognizing that nothing, lasts forever. So while it's happening, if you're doing something you love, like the greatest memory I have from my time at Sportsnet was standing on the 50-yard line after the Giants upset the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 42 and having confetti falling on me as everything looked like Wizard of Oz Technicolor, like the colors could not have been brighter or more vibrant. And I remember in that moment, I just stopped and looked around and just said, wow, like this is one of those moments you'll remember. And that's really what all of these experiences are. They're just made up of these tremendous moments that really define our careers.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was Roger Goodell messing with the contrast just to make that moment a little extra special for you.
It
Um,
happens.
but in a world of sports, we measure success with athletes by how many championships you've won, where you sit in the all-time great leading lists. As sport media professionals, we count, how many Super Bowls have you worked, how many Olympics have you covered. But personally, yourself as a teacher, how do you measure success in the real world and being present in front of students every day?
You know, I mean, there's a lot to that question that, and I love the question because, how do we define success? Is sort of what I pull from what you just shared with me, and I've been very, very fortunate. But the reason I feel I'm fortunate to have done the work that I am doing, that I've had a chance to do in the past, and it always usually revolves around one thing: the fact that I've had the ability to decide what it is I want to do and then go after it. And I can't predict how the future is going to play out. I can't predict how other people are going to perceive me and judge me based on what they might deem successful or what society deems successful. But what I can honestly tell you, Matthew, is that my values, my ethics have always driven me to do the right thing, to treat people the way I want to be treated, to take high roads, to look at ways where I can give back and serve others and make a difference in other people's lives. I've been so fortunate to be able to have spent a good chunk of these last 10 years making that the focus of everything I do. How can I make a positive impact on people's lives on an individual basis? How can I make a positive impact on this industry? When I worked at Sportsnet, and this isn't to say Sportsnet, it just speaks to culture.
Mhm.
The culture that I that was very present at Sportsnet was, it just it made and it forced me to question if there was just a better way, if there was a different way that we could do this where it really was revolved around inclusivity, how everybody could feel like they were a part of something and valued. And if you think about like why are my classes, as you put it, Matthew, why do they feel so inclusive? Why do they feel like a club? Why does everybody have a voice? Why do we all get excited to come there? Just because I always felt like that just benefited and created an environment where we could all learn and be and feel like we belong, at this core, inherent state where we all deserve the right to be treated equally and feel like as long as we're being respectful in a space that we all have a place where we can be. you know, the real world isn't always like that. But if this ideal of creating that space has driven me every single day with every interaction I have with my students, every lecture, every lab, every single time, I don't take a single lecture off. That's how important this is to me, is to know that creating that feeling that you talked about, you said it's a feeling. It's creating that feeling and knowing that if we feel a certain way, if we feel successful, we are successful. If we feel we belong, we belong. And that, in many ways, is the secret between coaching and teaching. If you look at even to yourself, Matthew, and say, if I really dig down and say, what was different about Dan's classes versus the other classes? And it's not even direct comparisons. Or what made my classes unique, maybe is a better way to put it, is that I focus very much on how everyone feels in that space. The
I
result,
can And I can certainly say that it definitely does work. Like we've both gone back and forth. It's an incredible learning atmosphere, and as a result, I mean it's driven me to want a career in a path that I really did not think I would end up in. I could barely put a sentence together in elementary school, and next thing I know, I have publications on TSN. I'm working for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, so it's not without you. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for joining me today and teaching me your ways, teaching me everything you know. You're definitely making an impact on this next generation.
well, that's pretty much the highest compliment you could pay me, Matthew. Thank you. Thank you. I mean that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew, for having me, for sharing that, and for asking such thoughtful questions today. It's just been a pleasure reconnecting with you.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure as well. Thank you so much.